The morning Cody started digging, Miles Rourke was already 50 feet away, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, watching the mist come off the Hendricks Valley floor the way mist always comes off a valley in late October, slow and deliberate, like it has nowhere better to be. He had not expected to be here at all. He had driven through Darby Creek on his way to somewhere else 2 days ago, spotted a vacancy sign outside a motel that charged $46 a night, and told himself one night. Then he spotted the diner. Then the diner had pie. Then the rain had settled in hard enough that driving felt like a disagreement he didn't need. 2 nights became a question he hadn't answered yet. Cody was off the leash because there was no one around for Miles and because Cody didn't need a leash to stay close. He was a German shepherd, 9 years old, large and deliberate, the way working dogs get when they've been at it long enough to know what matters and what doesn't. His coat was a deep sable brown, with black guard hairs over a warm tan underlay, blacker along the spine and shoulders. And he moved through the tall, dead grass of the abandoned orchard, with his nose low and his ears canted forward, reading something Miles couldn't smell. Miles watched him. He'd learned a long time ago to pay attention when Cody's ears looked like that. The orchard had not been worked in years. He could tell that without knowing anything about orchards. The apple trees were unpruned, their branches crossing each other like arguments left unresolved, the fruit long rotted where it had fallen. A low stone wall ran along the western edge, mossy and partially collapsed. Beyond it, the valley dropped away toward a line of spruce. The sky was the pale gray of old concrete, no color in it yet, and a wind was moving cold and steady out of the north. Cody stopped. He planted all 4 feet, lowered his head another inch, and began to dig. Miles walked over. He knew the dog's different kinds of digging. This was not the frivolous kind, not the half-interested pawing at a mole tunnel. This was the kind where Cody's whole body leaned into it, where his back legs braced and his shoulders drove, where he didn't stop to look up. It took 40 seconds. What came up first was cloth. Old cloth, muddy brown, folded flat. Then the shape underneath it. Then, as Miles crouched and pulled the cloth aside with 2 fingers, a wooden box the size of a hardback novel, sealed along its lid with a strip of electrical tape, gone brittle with age. He held it in both hands. It was heavier than it looked. Something was written on the underside of the lid in black marker, faded but legible. He read it once. Then he read it again. He said the name out loud, and the sound of it, in all that quiet orchard, surprised him. Harlan Foss. If this story has caught something in you already, stay close. Subscribe if you haven't. Turn the bell on so you don't miss what comes next. The name meant nothing to him. It was just a name on a box buried in an abandoned orchard. The weight of the thing, the care of the wrapping, the way Cody had gone straight to that spot without hesitation, told Miles this was not the kind of thing you reburied and walked away from. He carried the box back to the motel and set it on the dresser. He did not open it. Not that morning. Miles Rourke was 39 years old and had the build of a man who had spent most of his adult life carrying things heavier than he looked comfortable with. Broad through the shoulders, thick in the neck, with hands that had the particular roughness that comes from ropes and tools and cold weather over many years. He kept his hair cropped short, dark with a thread of gray starting at the right temple, and he had a jaw that sat naturally set, not clenched, just ready. His eyes were a pale brownish gray, the color of creek water in November, and they moved the way eyes move when they've been trained to register exits, edges, and faces all at once. He didn't look like a man with a plan. He looked like a man who had been between plans for longer than he intended. He'd done 12 years in the Marine Corps, most of it in logistics and security assignments that took him to places without good weather and brought him back to places without good reasons to stay. He'd mustered out 3 years ago from a base in North Carolina, driven west with Cody in the back seat, and had not stopped moving in any meaningful sense since. He was not running from anything in particular. He was simply not running toward anything either, and the difference between those two states had gotten smaller over time than he liked to think about. He left the box on the dresser and walked to the diner. The diner was called Paulette's. It had green vinyl booths, a counter with 8 stools, and a woman behind it named Dee Mulvaney, who had apparently been there long enough to know everyone who had ever eaten there, and their family going back 1 generation. She was 61, stout and quick, with short silver-streaked hair and reading glasses she wore on a beaded cord around her neck and never actually used for reading. She refilled Miles's coffee without being asked and set a plate of eggs in front of him before he'd finished asking for them. "You staying another night?" she said. It was not unfriendly. It was practical. "Don't know yet," he said. She looked at him over the counter. "You got the look of someone who found something." He studied her for a moment. "What kind of look is that?" "Unsettled," she said. "Not scared. Just like the morning rearranged itself on you." He told her about the box, about the orchard, about the name on the lid. Dee set her rag down on the counter. "Harlan," she said. She said it the way people say a name they haven't heard in a while, but recognize immediately. "Lord, I haven't heard that name in 8 or 9 years. You knew him?" "Everybody knew Harlan. He farmed that orchard for 40 years. Apples and a little pear. Nothing fancy, but good fruit." She poured herself a coffee, which Miles took as a sign she was going to talk for a minute. "He died in the winter. I want to say 6 years back. Maybe 7. No family left in the county. His wife had passed before him. He had a son, but the son had been gone a long time." "What happened to the farm?" "Sold," she said. "Or lost. I'm not entirely sure. There was some kind of dispute over the estate. Some company came in." She shook her head. "I remember people were upset about it. There was a piece in the county paper. But things like that happen, and then they stop being news and people move on." Miles looked at his eggs. "The land is abandoned. Has been since before Harlan died, near as I can tell. He couldn't work it anymore, and he couldn't afford to hire anyone. It just went back to itself." He thought about the box, the weight of it, the careful wrapping. "He buried it himself," Miles said. Not a question. More thinking aloud. Dee looked at him steadily. "Harlan wasn't the kind of man who did things without a reason." Miles left a 10 on the counter and walked back to the motel. He opened the box. He had to work the electrical tape loose carefully. It came away in brittle strips, leaving the faint ghost of its adhesive on the wood. The box itself had been made by hand, the joints tight and the surface sanded smooth, the kind of work done by someone who was not in a hurry and did not have to be. Miles recognized that kind of work. He had seen it in the things Marines made during long, quiet stretches, in the things old men made in workshops on winter afternoons when they had nowhere they needed to go. Inside, wrapped in a second layer of waxed cloth, were 4 things. A laminated copy of a land deed, dated 1974, showing the orchard parcel of 41 acres purchased by Harlan and Vera Foss. A handwritten letter in pencil on lined paper, 3 pages, the handwriting careful and slow. A small key on a ring with a stamped metal tag that read, Box 14/Darby Creek Savings, and a folded photograph, creased at the center, of a man and a woman standing in the orchard, in what looked like August, the trees full and green behind them, both of them squinting a little in the bright light, and both of them smiling the way people smile when they don't know they're doing it. He read the letter. It was addressed to no one in particular, or rather to whoever found it. It was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was written in the tone of a man who had accepted something difficult and was trying to leave the record straight in whatever time he had left. Harlan wrote that the land had been taken from him. Not legally stolen, not exactly. Taken the way things get taken when someone with more lawyers than you gets interested in what you have. A company called Vantage Land Partners had approached him in the winter of the year he turned 79, when his health was already failing and Vera was 2 years gone and he was alone out there with the orchard and a debt on the property he'd carried for years. A manageable debt. The kind that doesn't worry you until someone shows up and makes it worry you. They had offered to buy out the debt. They had told him he could stay on the land for the rest of his life. They had shown him papers, and he had signed them. And then 6 months later, a different set of papers had arrived informing him that the land transfer was complete, and he was no longer the owner, and the arrangement about staying on the land was, per the language of the letter he'd received, not a binding agreement. He had been 80 years old. He had moved into a cousin's house in town. He had died the following winter. He wrote in the letter that the box was not for justice exactly. He had given up on that. He wrote that it was for the record. He didn't want the land to be forgotten, or for Vera to be forgotten, or for 40 years of work to be forgotten. And he thought that burying the truth in the ground of the place where they had lived, it was the only thing he had left to offer. He wrote that the key opened a safety deposit box at Darby Creek Savings. He wrote that everything he had left was in that box. More papers, more records, the original correspondence with Vantage, the signatures, the sequence of it all. He wrote that if anyone found this, he hoped they would do what they felt was right with it, and that he was sorry he hadn't been able to do more himself. He had signed it simply. Harlan Foss, October 14th. He had not written the year. Miles sat with the letter in his hands for a long time. Cody had come to sit beside him on the floor, his shoulder against Miles's knee, his head up and his eyes on the middle distance, the way he did when he sensed something had shifted in the room. "Yeah," Miles said to him. "Me too." The Darby Creek Savings Branch was on the main street, a red brick building that shared its block with a hardware store and a tax preparation office. The woman at the desk, whose name tag read Sylvia, was perhaps 55, trim and precise, with the demeanor of someone who had worked in a quiet bank in a small town for many years and had arrived at a kind of careful competence that was its own form of grace. She looked at the key. She looked at the letter. She looked at Miles. "The box is still active," she said. "The fees were paid forward. Paid 10 years in advance, actually, back when Mr. Foss set it up." "He knew," Miles said. "He planned," she said, which was a different thing and clearly what she meant. She brought him to the box in the private room. He was not the account holder, so he told her that plainly. She thought about it, looked at the letter again, and said she was going to call the branch manager. The manager was a man named Gerald Ott, somewhere in his early 60s, with a white mustache and the measured calm of someone who did not enjoy surprises but had learned to process them deliberately. He read the letter. He looked at Miles. He looked at Sylvia. "I'm going to call our legal counsel," he said. "Not to obstruct, just to be certain of the right way to do this. Will you wait?" Miles waited. He bought a cup of coffee from the machine in the lobby and sat with Cody on the sidewalk bench outside and watched the main street of Darby Creek do its mid-morning business. A delivery truck idling in front of the hardware store. A woman walking a small dog that looked at Cody with enormous alarm. Two men in work gear coming out of the tax office, arguing about something with the low-energy comfort of people who had been arguing about the same thing for years. Gerald Ott came out 40 minutes later. Our counsel believes, given the letter and the circumstances, that we are on solid ground allowing you to review the contents as a finder of record. We would want to make copies and retain them, and we would want the original documents to remain in the box pending any formal legal process. That's fine, Miles said. The box held exactly what Harlan had said it would hold. The original purchase agreement with Vantage Land Partners, signed in Harlan's wavering hand. The subsequent deed transfer documents. A thick sheaf of correspondence between Harlan and a representative of Vantage named Warren Slade, in which the early letters were warm and reassuring, and the later letters were cold, with legal language about finalized transactions. And at the back, in a sealed envelope, a letter from a different attorney, one Harlan had consulted after the fact, explaining that the life estate provision Harlan believed he had signed was not in the document he actually signed, and that the provision he had signed instead was a standard transfer with no retention clause, and that recovering the land at that point would require litigation that would cost more than the land was worth. The attorney's letter was dated 3 years before Harlan died. Miles photographed every page with his phone. He did it slowly, making sure each frame was clear, each signature visible. He asked Sylvia if she could tell him anything about who owned the land now. She couldn't do that, she said. Not from the bank. She suggested the county assessor's office on the second floor of the courthouse, though. The county assessor's office was staffed by a man named Bob Dreyer, 72 years old, if he was a day, with the particular unhurried patience of someone who had decided a long time ago that no piece of paperwork was urgent enough to rush. He was pleased to look up the parcel. He found it in approximately 90 seconds. Vantage Land Partners, he said. Still, they took the deed in. He squinted at the screen. 7 years ago. Paid the property taxes every year since. Not much on a parcel that size, unimproved. Must be waiting on something. Development, Miles said. Dreyer shrugged. There's been talk for years about a road extension through the valley. If that goes in, that parcel gets a lot more interesting. Land value would go up 4 or 5 times, easy. He looked at Miles over his reading glasses. You know, it wouldn't be the first time I've seen somebody buy orchard land for next to nothing and hold it until infrastructure came their way. Miles walked back outside. The wind had picked up and the temperature had dropped a degree or two, and the sky had gone from gray concrete to a darker, more purposeful gray. He stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and watched a pickup truck idle at the one traffic light on Darby Creek's main street. A woman came out of the hardware store carrying something in a paper bag. A man in a work jacket came around the corner, looked at the sky, pulled his collar up. An ordinary Tuesday morning in a town most people drove through without stopping. He thought about Harlan sitting at the end of the counter at Paulette's every Saturday, watching this same street through the window, the same pickup trucks, the same light cycling through its sequence. A man who had spent 40 years among these buildings and these hills, and had died knowing that what he'd built was sitting in someone else's name, and he had not been able to stop it. What that felt like, Miles could not fully imagine, but he understood the shape of it. He had seen the shape of it in other contexts. Loss that comes not from violence, but from attrition. The slow giving of ground until the ground is gone. He thought about a letter signed with a name, and no year. He pulled up the photographs on his phone and started looking for a number. He found her through the County Bar Association's online directory, cross-referencing the attorney whose letter was in the box. Her name was Nora Vance, and she was listed as a property and estate attorney in a town 22 miles north. He called the number. A receptionist answered, and then after he explained what he had and where he'd found it, Vance came on herself. She was quiet for a moment after he finished speaking. "The Paws parcel," she said. "I've heard that name. Were you involved?" "No, but a colleague of mine was, briefly, years ago. Harlan couldn't afford to pursue it. We're a small county. People talk." She paused. "You say you have the original purchase agreement and the correspondence." "I have photographs. The originals are still in the deposit box. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" He looked at the motel sign down the block. "I can," he said. That evening, Dee Mulvaney fed him pot roast at the counter and told him more about Harlan. She had not set out to tell him much. It simply came out the way things do when someone starts talking about a person they respected, and the talking finds its own level. Harlan had been a quiet man, she said. Not unfriendly, just interior. He had come into the diner every Saturday morning for years, always ordered the same thing, 2 eggs over easy, rye toast, black coffee, and always sat at the end of the counter by the window so he could see the street. After Vera died, he came in more often. She thought he was lonelier than he admitted to anyone. He had a habit of carving things when his hands needed something to do. Small wooden figures he kept in his coat pockets, and sometimes he would leave one on the counter as a kind of tip. Not because he didn't leave money too, but because he liked to give people something made rather than something earned. "I have one somewhere," Dee said. She went into the back and came out holding a small wooden bird, maybe 3 inches long, smooth and careful. Every feather suggested, but none overwrought. He said it was a cedar waxwing. I had to look it up. Miles held it for a moment. Cody leaned against his leg under the counter stool. "Did he have any family?" Miles asked. "You mentioned a son." Dee nodded. "Name of Garrett. Moved away years before Harlan got sick. I think they had a falling out, the way fathers and sons sometimes do. Garrett would be in his early 50s now, I'd guess. I don't know if he ever came back." "He'd want to know about this," Miles said. "Probably," she said. "Whether he'd want to do anything about it is a different question." He nodded. He understood that kind of difference. Nora Vance turned out to be 53, direct, and the kind of methodical that moves fast. She had dark hair going silver at the part, a face that had spent time outdoors and showed it in a way she didn't seem to mind, and an office that suggested she read everything that came across her desk and forgot almost none of it. She looked at the photographs for a long time. She pulled up documents on her computer and compared them without speaking. Cody lay on the rug near the door, apparently satisfied with the room. Finally, she took her glasses off and set them on the desk. "This is a deed transfer that contains what I would characterize as a misrepresentation of material terms to a vulnerable adult," she said. The life estate provision that Mr. Foss was verbally assured of was demonstrably not in the document he signed. The correspondence makes clear he believed it was. That's a basis for civil action for a fraudulent inducement. She paused. "The challenge is that he is deceased, and the party who would normally bring the action is an heir." "He has a son," Miles said. "Garrett Foss." She pulled a notepad toward her. "Do you know where he is?" "Not yet." She studied him for a moment. "Mr. Rourke, why are you doing this?" He thought about the letter, the waxed cloth. the orchard standing empty in the cold. "He went to a lot of trouble to leave a record," he said. "Seemed like somebody ought to pick it up." She held his gaze for a second, then wrote something on the notepad. "Find him. If he's willing to pursue it, I'll take the civil case on contingency. Vantage has done this kind of thing in other counties. I've seen the pattern. There's an attorney general's office that has been building a file on predatory land acquisition targeting elderly property owners. This would fit perfectly." She handed him a card. "Call me when you find him." Finding Garrett took 4 days and the assistance of Dreyer at the assessor's office, who had a cousin who had gone to school with Garrett and knew he had settled in Central Oregon and worked in timber. Miles found a number through a timber industry directory, left a message, and waited. Those 4 days were quiet ones. He walked the orchard again, twice. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, going back. Maybe nothing. Maybe just the habit of returning to a place that had started to matter, which was itself a habit he didn't entirely trust in himself. Cody came with him each time and moved among the trees with his nose down, reading whatever the frost-hardened ground was still giving off, apparently satisfied with what he found. On the second day, he drove out to where the road extension was rumored to go. He found it on a county planning map Dreyer had printed for him, a proposed route that would cut through the valley floor 2 miles south of town, connecting the county highway to a regional distribution node that had been in planning stages for several years. If it went through, the Foss parcel's 41 acres would sit within a 1/4 mile of the new road. Prime industrial-adjacent land in a valley that had been purely agricultural for 100 years. He drove out and stood on the county road and looked at the valley and thought about what it was worth now versus what it would be worth in 5 years if the road got funded. The math was simple enough that he didn't need to do it. On the 4th day, Dreyer called him to say his cousin had passed the number along to someone who knew Garrett directly, and that Garrett had been told to expect a call. Garrett called back on the 3rd evening. He was 52, the voice on the phone said. He sounded wary and a little tired, the way voices sound when they expect something to ask something of them. Miles explained what he had found. He did not editorialize. He gave Garrett the facts in the order they had happened, and then he read him the last paragraph of his father's letter, the part about not wanting 40 years to be forgotten. There was a long silence on the phone. "I didn't know he'd done that," Garrett said at last. "I knew he'd lost the land. We weren't in contact then. By the time I heard, he was already gone." "I'm sorry," Miles said. Another silence. "He buried it in the orchard?" "Northwest corner, near the stone wall. That's where he always planted things. He said the drainage was best there." Garrett's voice had changed a register, lower and quieter. "He planted a tree for my mother there, after she died." Miles looked out the motel window at the empty parking lot, the light from the sign making a pale rectangle on the wet asphalt. Cody was on the bed, watching him. "There's an attorney here named Nora," Miles said. "She believes you have a viable case. She'll take it on contingency. She'd like to talk to you." "What would it mean if we won?" "The land comes back, and there's a pattern, apparently. Other families. The Attorney General's office is involved. Your case could be part of something larger." Another long pause. "I haven't been back there in almost 20 years. "You don't have to be here for the legal process," Miles said. "Nora can manage it remotely." "It's not that," Garrett said. He went quiet for a moment. "I left badly. I wasn't good to him the last few years we talked. I didn't make it right before he died." Miles didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say to that. "I'll call the attorney," Garrett said finally, "and I'll think about coming." He hung up. Nora filed with the county civil court and forwarded a formal complaint to the state attorney general's Consumer Protection Division the following week. The documentation from the safety deposit box, combined with the pattern evidence Nora had quietly been assembling from other county attorneys she knew, produced something that moved faster than Miles had expected. He didn't know much about legal processes, but he knew momentum when he saw it, and this had it. Vantage Land Partners sent a representative to Darby Creek in the third week of November. His name was not Warren Slade, who seemed to have left the company, but a man in his 40s named Keating, well-dressed in the particular way of someone who has learned that looking appropriate is a form of argument. He sat down with Nora and her documents for 2 hours in the conference room of her office and left without saying much. She called Miles afterward. "They're going to settle," she said. "They don't want the Attorney General case to go forward. There are 4 other parcels in this county alone. If this goes to the AG's office in a meaningful way, it becomes a statewide matter." What does settling mean? For Garrett, it means return of the parcel and a financial settlement for the years of lost use. For the other families, it likely means the same, through separate processes once this one sets the precedent. For Vantage, it means they stop the bleeding before it gets worse. Miles sat with that for a moment. Harlan's letter worked. Harlan's letter, and whatever it takes to have someone carry it to the right people. She paused. "Thank you, Mr. Rourke, for staying long enough to do this." He hadn't thought of it that way. He had just kept making the next phone call. Garrett Foss arrived on a Thursday in late November, 2 days before the ground froze for good. He was a wide man who had narrowed some with age, with his father's jaw and his father's way of standing still when something required thought. He drove up from the Portland airport in a rental car, checked into the same motel Miles had been staying at for nearly a month, and knocked on Miles's door that evening. They shook hands. Garrett looked at Cody for a long moment. "He's the one who found it," he said. "He found the spot," Miles said. "I don't know what he knew about what was in it." Garrett crouched down and held out his hand. Cody sniffed it carefully, then pressed the top of his head briefly against Garrett's palm. It was a small gesture. Garrett's jaw tightened. "My father always said a dog could tell," he said. "Mine too," Miles said. They went to the orchard the next morning, the 3 of them, through a frost that had gone hard overnight and left the dead grass silver. The apple trees stood bare, their bark dark with moisture. The branches thickened from years without pruning, going where they wanted. Miles had been in the orchard a dozen times by now, and he still found it strange in a way he couldn't name cleanly. The combination of evidence of care, all those decades of planting and tending, with the evidence of abandonment now layered over it. A place that had been worked hard and then left. He knew what that looked like. He had seen it in other things. Cody moved through the trees unhurried, following nothing in particular, just present in the way he was always present. He paused once at the place where he had dug, sniffed the frost-cracked earth, and moved on. Whatever he had been looking for was gone now. Garrett walked to the northwest corner. He moved carefully, taking his time, and Miles noticed that he looked at every tree he passed, not like a man evaluating timber, but like a man checking on things he had last seen a long time ago. The apple trees didn't look back. They were just trees. Miles understood that Garrett was not seeing them as trees, exactly. He was seeing what his father had seen in them, and had put into them and had carried for 40 years. He stood beside the stone wall for a while without speaking. Miles stayed back, far enough to give him the space the moment wanted. When Garrett turned around, his eyes were red, though his face was set. "He would have hated that it took all this," he said. He would have said the land wasn't worth what it cost. Maybe, Miles said, but he buried the box anyway. Garrett looked at the hole in the ground, still visible, the frost-cracked soil around its edges. He always planted things in November, he said, even when everyone told him it was too late in the season. He looked up at the empty trees. He said you could put something in the ground in November and it would still come up right. Miles didn't answer that. He just let it stand in the cold air between them, where it had room. The settlement closed in December. Garrett regained title to the 41 acres. The Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into Vantage Land Partners and 2 related subsidiaries. 3 other county families were identified as potential claimants. Nora was kept busy into the following spring. Miles stayed in Darby Creek through December. He told himself it was because the work wasn't finished. Then he told himself it was because Cody liked the cold. Then one evening, Dee set a plate in front of him and looked at him the way she looked at things she intended to name clearly. "You're not passing through anymore," she said. "I was going to keep moving," he said. "Where?" He didn't answer that because he didn't have an answer. He had not had an answer in 3 years, and the absence of one had started to feel less like freedom and more like a question he was afraid of. "Harlan sat on that stool for 20 years, Dee said. "He came in Saturday mornings because he liked being somewhere he was known. That's not a small thing. Being somewhere you're known." Cody, from his spot by the door, lifted his head and looked at Miles the way he did when something in the room had clarified. Miles looked at the counter, the worn edge of it, the faint ring where the coffee cup had been set down 1,000 times. "Does anybody need work done?" he said. "Around here. Does anyone need a hand with something?" Dee smiled. It was small, and it was genuine. "I know about 6 people who've been waiting for someone to ask that," she said. The winter settled in over the Hendricks Valley, deep and cold and particular, the way winter settles in places where it has been doing it for a long time. The valley floor went white. The spruce line at the far edge darkened. The road through town got quiet in the early evenings in the way that small towns in cold places get quiet. The specific hush of a place that has decided to wait out the season with patience and a working furnace. He rented a room at the edge of town from a retired schoolteacher named Bet, who charged fair rent and asked reasonable questions. She was 70, slight and deliberate, with the kind of steady attention to small things that long teachers develop, noticing whether the front walk needed salt, whether the pipes needed watching, whether the man who had moved into her back room was eating enough. She did not ask him why he had stayed. She seemed to have decided that his being there made a kind of sense she did not need explained. He did repair work mostly, and the kind of labor that accumulates when no one has been around to do it, and he did it without comment, which was what people needed most. He fixed a roof on a barn that belonged to a man named Kurt, whose hands shook too much for heights. He replaced the rotted porch boards on the house of a woman named Ella, 84 years old, who brought him coffee at 10 in the morning without asking whether he wanted it. He cleared gutters, reset fence posts, winterized a vacant house whose owner had gone south, and asked Dee to find someone reliable. He did not think of it as building something. He thought of it as being useful. There was a difference in his mind, though the difference was getting harder to explain. Garrett came back in February to walk the orchard again. He said he was thinking about replanting it. He had been reading about apple varieties suited to the valley soil. He said he didn't know yet whether he'd move back or just hire someone to manage it. And Miles said that was a thing that could be decided later. They stood at the northwest corner again, just the 2 of them and Cody. "There's an apple tree here," Garrett said. The bark was old and the trunk was thick. "He planted it when my mother died." "I figured," Miles said. Garrett put his hand on the bark for a moment. Then he stepped back. "I'm going to replant the whole thing," he said. "Starting this spring. Whatever comes up, comes up." He would have liked that. Miles looked at the dormant tree, at the valley spread below the stone wall, white and still, the spruce line dark at the far edge, the sky the clean, flat gray of February. Cody sat beside him and did not move. He thought about a man who had buried his 40 years in the ground, not in hope exactly, but in the faith that the ground would keep it until someone came along who could do something with it. He thought about all the things that get buried when there is no one around to witness them, and all the things that come up anyway if the drainage is good and someone is patient enough to wait. That hit him differently than he expected. He had not been looking for a place. He had told himself that for 3 years. He had been moving, and moving had felt like a kind of honest answer to a question he could not otherwise resolve. There are questions that movement does not answer. There are questions that only stopping can reach. If this story has stayed with you, that means something. It means you know what it is to carry something that needs to be set down, and what it costs to finally set it down, and what it feels like when the ground holds it. May that be your season, whatever month you find yourself in. May what you've carried find the place it was always meant to land. May the soil be good and the drainage better. And may someone come along if you can't do it yourself. May God bless you, protect your family, and keep the ground beneath your feet from forgetting anything worth remembering. He stayed. He rented the room through March, then through spring, and then he stopped counting months because it had stopped feeling like a thing that needed to be counted. Bet, the schoolteacher, put a hook by the back door where Cody's leash could hang, and she did it without comment, which was exactly right. Some mornings, early, before the diner opened, Miles would walk the long way around the edge of town past the orchard. He liked the orchard in the early light, the bare branches in the winter, the first blooms in April, the fruit coming in slow. He would stand at the stone wall sometimes and look at the valley, and Cody would stand beside him, and they would stay there together until the light changed, and it was time to go in. It was enough. It was, he had started to think, exactly enough.